welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So what we thought we would do is try to contrast two views. One is from an analyst and one from a visionary. You can judge who's more visionary after, I suppose, and who's more of an analyst. I actually started thinking you're probably going to be PowerPointed to death. There are slides here. We'll see where they take us. But the key is really the discussion, debate. We may have time for a couple questions. If you have some, just interject. The one thing I would request is from the gentleman in the back. This light is harsh, so if you could dim it just a little bit for me, your little showmakers would appreciate it. This clicker is also challenge. So the first thing was I thought we would talk about some of the big kind of questions in workspace. And some of the suppliers of workspace services don't necessarily address these head-on, or they dodge them. So the first one is actually more for me in the analyst community. The way we define the space, is it outdated and is it serving its purpose? The next thing is this obsession with tech. I mentioned earlier I'm not really a technologist at heart. And so I'm a kind of natural-born skeptic when it comes to the adoption of new technologies. You can have my real views on AI or 5G later, or 6G, as someone asked me last year, and that was referenced at the beginning. The reason is the third question, that people really aren't using them very much, at least not the ones we traditionally track. So we're going to explore some data around that, and that raises the question of who we're selling to, and whether we're hitting the relevant audience, I think, with some of the techs and services that we provide. I think the answer is no, and we need to change that. And then a quick look into the future where we will invite some audience participation as well if you guys have some things to add. So this is our definition here on the left of workspace. This was put together by a team member of mine who claims she's not a Tory party member, but from the two in the middle, I really begin to doubt her claims. They look like they're from Tory Party Central. A lady in her grandmother's string of pearls, I'm sure exquisitely chosen. But that said, I mean, the really important point here is that it puts the employee at the center. This is the kind of Ovum's view of the world of workspace. And we build from the center out. What are the business drivers? Things like enabling flexibility or productivity in the workplace, improving customer experience. And then we build it out to what technologies enable that. And you'll see some old acronyms there: Unified Communications and Collaboration, CRM. 20-year-old acronym there, and a new one called IoT, which used to just be called M2M, and security, of course, and the network that supports it. And then on top of that, we like to emphasize at Ovum the importance of services. You can't just have a technology there. It has to be brought to life through managed professional services, consulting, support, integration, and increasingly app dev skills, right? Because you're going to have to innovate and build apps on top of it. But actually, I'm beginning to think, in conversation with Julien, this might be completely unrealistic. I mean, how many firms have a comprehensive strategy like this and then execute against it? You know how many silos there are in companies.
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting is actually there are 3.3 billion people working out there. 3.3. Around 70% of them are not connected. So basically, you can replace all these bubbles with just a pen. Yeah. This is what they use today for vast majority of the workers. I think we use around like 10% of our capacity as individual from our brain. I think this is exactly the same thing when it comes to the company, because most of your people are actually not connected. So I think it's great to actually have all these services and business drivers and technologies, but fact is actually today only 1% of your people can get them. So this is probably the challenging part, especially because today most of these people in their personal lives are connected. They have access to a smartphone. I was in Norway earlier this week. Smartphone penetration rate is above 80%. 80%. But still, they have a lot of companies in retail industry, in services industry, and these people today at work are not connected. So the definition might be now a bit broader.
Or maybe another way to put it is this definition is rubbish. But a more constructive way might be to say it addresses a certain type of buyer and a certain type of worker, but quite not possibly the sort of unbanked. In financial services, they always say, how do they address the unbanked, right? And there, I suppose there's an analogy there in the workspace that many employees are unconnected.
Exactly.
Okay, exactly. Great. This is a scary one for me because I have to get into a little detail about all this tech. But you've heard the term AI. There is a talk on IoT applicable to public sector, so often called smart cities a little bit later. We haven't heard yet about VR and AR, but if you went over to the consumer track, I probably suspect that's 40% of what they're talking about. There's a term there called CPaaS. Any of you heard of CPaaS? Communications platform as a service, building your own voice apps into your business process or into your applications. And we do these surveys at Ovum every year. And this is a survey of enterprise buyers and line of business. And we ask them simply, are you deploying or planning to deploy any of the following workplace technologies? We got a pretty positive result, depending on how you see it, which is that anywhere from 42 to sort of, I think it's about 23 at the bottom % said, yes, they're actually either have deployed it or it's imminent, with strong plans in red there in those red bars to do so. A little less than an analysis. If we asked this question 15 years ago, we probably would have had the same percentages. So I always read this as a kind of intent or will. So there's a willingness to listen to some of these pitches from suppliers about what these technologies can do. And in some cases, they are real. I mean, a good example, actually, I saw colleagues from Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise here building with Carrefour, a major French retail chain, a CPaaS application that enables, for example, shoppers who have the app to push a button if they're in a certain department and get connected to an expert on, I don't know, machine tools or a certain type of food, what ingredients are in here. And even though that expert might not be in the store. So that's a great example of some of these technologies. But I do begin to worry sometimes that there's this focus on the new, but not on the fundamental.
Yeah, we see this kind of increasing gap between basically sometimes what companies are obsessed with and what kind of tools their employees have access to. So what's quite interesting is basically a bit more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you used to have much better tools at work than at home. I would say that since 2007, you have better tools at home than at work.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we see actually companies still pursuing like this race, for innovation around AR, VR, and believe me, as a Facebook Inc. employee, I love VR and AR. But the fact is we are really at the early days. And we first have to find the right use cases before actually searching for developing the technology's adoption. So what's quite interesting here is, again, I just shared this with you, this story, but what's quite funny is a lot of companies are investing a lot in these areas. At the same time, when it comes the day to announce and to share with the employees all the great findings and progress on AR, VR, AI, I think I have all the buzzwords here.
You have all the buzzwords.
They actually share these things with their employees via email. And then you start to see the big disconnect between basically all these shiny things and the reality for the vast majority of the workers. How do you want these people to, one, believe in what you say, second, embrace your vision, to actually contribute and actually build a better place, for the company?
I have no idea what you're talking about, because at Informa, we only get very short social type communications from our CEO. We never get long emails.
That's good. He's using WhatsApp?
No, I'm being a little sarcastic. Definitely a lot into information sharing, but I would say in a traditional format. Yeah, definitely.
Well, actually, they switched straight to WhatsApp.
I agree, yeah.
Which is pretty great for us in a way, but also very scary.
I find it a challenge to get all that info in the message limit, but I agree it could be innovative. So Actually, just to build on what Julien was saying, it's not just about the new, right? It's like what technologies are being used by enterprises or in enterprises that have been out there for a while. And you can see some of the technologies listed there. Some of them are, we would class as fairly mature. This chart's very analysty, so I apologize, but essentially it's pretty easy. The percentage of companies on the left, the uptake is on the bottom. It's a percentage of employees. And what we see, if you just look at the peak on the left, where do we see most of these technologies that are peaking on the left? They're technologies like web conferencing, video conferencing, and enterprise social, typically used, reported to be used by about 20% of employees in the highest percent of companies. So in other words, those technologies that are fairly established and that companies are spending millions on, they're really addressing 20% of the typical employee base of the average kind of Acme brick company type of enterprise, right? And where we see kind of a long tail of technology that's used a little bit more broadly, not to say it's necessarily used by the unconnected, but at least used more broadly by the connected, are very, very basic things. Email, instant messaging, document storage, maybe in the cloud, whether that's consumer-oriented or an official enterprise-sanctioned solution. So again, we're really seeing this issue not just with new technologies, but some of the established collaboration services and technologies aren't really very broadly used.
The real question is why? Why? Why people are not using these tools? I mean, that's a question for you as well. Because the fact is actually in the enterprise right now, which is pretty scary, the number one communication tool, I'm not necessarily talking about the UK, is WhatsApp. Maybe, do you use WhatsApp? Yeah, with your colleagues sometimes, with your boss, in stores, I mean, everywhere. And so what's crazy here is basically now you have a new expectations from the employees. At some point, these guys, if they can't get what they expect from their IT team, they will just like bring what they use at home. And then you start to see this famous consumerization of IT, which has been like invented after the iPhone launch, but now it's more like from a software perspective, where you see actually Dropbox and WhatsApp and Messenger and Facebook groups. I invite you, by the way, to make a quick search on Facebook, on your Facebook, and you just search and you have a tab actually, groups. So search for the name of your company, and you will find hundreds, thousands of groups created by your people to communicate, collaborate, celebrate wins, ask for question, help. Because these tools actually are tools they know and they love. And so I think this is a great learning for all of us, is to build tools not based on the features, but also based on the love they can bring, and they can get from the users.
Sounds quite Oprah Winfrey-esque to me.
True. I have a gift.
But I do agree, it's very appealing. I mean, do you think there are implications? I mean, we haven't discussed this Facebook groups already being formed before in consumer version of Facebook, but clearly there are some strong implications there, right? In terms of security, in terms of brand and reputation. If people are using the corporate brand in ways that may not be in line with corporate responsibility or the image that the company wants to present.
That's a massive challenge, and that's why actually we decided to enter the enterprise space. By the way, it's pretty interesting to see Facebook here in this room dedicated to enterprise when actually I'm not.
Yeah, you should be over there.
But that's why we decided to ship Workplace a couple of years ago, because internally at Facebook we started to use Facebook at Work, which was probably the worst name for an enterprise software. But for our own needs, because a lot of people at Facebook were using Facebook and Messenger for work. And as soon as we seen that, we were like, okay, so we need to provide controls first for us in terms of access, authentication, audits, and all these things. And that's why we shipped Workplace. But yeah, I mean, that's really interesting to see all the trends, coming now from consumer and actually like invading the workplace.
So just to dig a little deeper on consumer, and I spoke about this last year in a talk at Digital Futures with another vendor, and at the time we focused on millennials. That's a bit of a tired trope, I think, as well as, consumerization is fairly well established. But we tried to kind of identify, knowing this in the back of our mind, identify some of the things that were going on that were very different about this demand coming from younger people who, let's face it, now aren't very young anymore, which has implications for yours truly, and also who are beginning to make serious decisions in terms of enterprise buying. So I just picked out a couple of findings I thought I would share with you. At the top was really interesting because actually I've kind of misstated the finding. 2/3 of younger workers, this is a survey of about 1,200 workers in very advanced markets, so we didn't go to developing markets. So these people between 18 and 35 said that they would like to use more personal apps for work. I wrote tech, I don't know why I did that. It was really about apps. And that's something that we've seen evolve. And what you can see there is, I think it's WhatsApp on the right, actually, and one of your competitors' messaging services on the left, which we all have, bundled into everything. What the research told us was that employees in this age bracket really wanted new apps. They were less concerned with the flashy device than ever before. Smartphones have come and gone. They have the device they want. They may or may not demand their employer provide it. It's largely irrelevant. They'll get it anyway. But especially in developed, wealthy markets, people have the phone they want. So the question is, what are the apps that the business is providing for it, and are they compelling? Why are more messages sent? We were talking about IM. Why are so many more multiples of messages sent on consumer IM about work than on work IM about work? And then the second finding at the bottom was also of particular interest and came as a shock to me. We asked people whether they had coding experience or not, and then we excluded the ones who claimed they could code. And then we said, if you don't know how to code, would you be interested in learning to code to build some of your own collaboration applications? And 57% said yes. I'm sure after the first day of any such course, another 57% of those would probably disappear. But how I interpreted that was a willingness to learn, but also a curiosity. And finally, just important to note here, by coding, I don't think we mean, the ones and zeros and writing lines of code. I think I interpret it as personalizing your application, making it particularly relevant for you and the tasks at hand. So really we're moving to more of a platform-based discussion than an application discussion at this point.
I fully agree with you. I think customization, personalization is at the core, of what people want. I mean, this is a newsfeed generation. For years, we had the same portal, and one day came newsfeed, and basically my newsfeed is different from your newsfeed, and we started to have this kind of new, again, expectation from software that what I will get from the software has been designed for me, and sometimes even by me. So that's something that I'm not very surprised by this stat here.
I think we're actually nearing the end, so I'd love to invite some audience questions and participation. We have about 5 or 6 minutes, but I thought just before we did that, we'd talk a little bit about what we think the future of a workplace would look like. You've covered much of this, but this is a Facebook slide, by the way, it's not mine, but I actually want to talk a little bit about the mobile-first element. Yep. So in addition to being a collaboration analyst, I claim to be an enterprise mobility analyst, and these things used to be separate. But we also asked questions many years ago, what % of you are mobilizing your enterprise applications? And it was always in that 35 to 40% range. By now, probably about 600 to 700% of enterprise applications not only would have been mobilized, but mobilized thrice over. Yet they're not. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of this first point, which again comes from another, you as my industry colleague, but we can't take for granted connectivity, and we can't take for granted the inherent mobility or lack of mobility of certain collaboration solutions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What's kind of interesting, previous generation, all of them, the first time they had access to internet was through a desktop. The new generation now, the first time they have access to internet is through a mobile. It will define the way they will think about IT, they will think about connectivity. Going back to a point about going mobile, around apps. It's not about building an app on mobile, because you know that in average we have all, in consumer world we have all like 42, 45 apps, but actually we only use like 7 apps a day. And we actually spend like probably 70% of our time on only 3 apps. So I think we will see, as in China, for instance, with WeChat, more like one app to get access to other apps and other services through bots and integrations and all these things. What I think you should really think about is what will be the entry point? What will be the delivery channel of content or even services so I can drive adoption? Because building apps is really, really easy. Driving adoption is really, really hard. Driving retention is even harder. So try to find the right partner that will be able to drive adoption up and keep people engaged. So actually you can get some ROI, from the development you have done on mobile.
It's a really interesting point about driving adoption up. It reminds me of another piece of survey work we did, which was with some HR and IT leaders, and we actually interviewed some HR people as well. And one of the interesting bits of feedback that came back was they're being forced to choose inferior technology with better user interface over superior technology with worse user interface. And I think that's actually really a good thing because it is about the uptake. The technology can't always be perfect. It can't fit your corporate needs 100%. Go for the 80%. Prioritize the user interface, because that's what both HR directors and the CIOs we talked to are saying is driving that uptake beyond the 20-25% that we saw in the earlier slide.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. This is what we see like with WhatsApp adoption.
Yeah.
It works, period. That's enough.
Exactly. All right, so I think we've talked to each other enough. I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. So I would love to invite some questions or comments from the audience. Any of you involved in the space? I see a question over there. I think there's a mic coming for you. Yeah.
I think your survey you did earlier about the number of people, the 30%, it drops off very quickly. If you break that down into demographic groups and ages, you see much different results.
Yeah.
From my experience, if I'm at work and I need to do a video conference with several offices, I'm looking around for somebody under the age of 30 to help me set it up. Because they know what to do, and they just huff and look at me like it's very simple.
Absolutely.
So I think it's the new millenniums or millennials. I think that's the people this is aimed at. Really, some of us kind of very, very pre-millennial are struggling with the technology and the pace of it today.
Yeah, and well, but I mean, don't doubt yourself. Sometimes you're struggling to set it up because it is a genuine pain in the backside. And I can't name anyone who I think provides video conferencing services that are a pain in the backside, but I can say there are definitely over-the-top challengers in enterprise who provide much more seamless, easy-to-use enterprise video. So part of the problem might not just be that you're maybe not a millennial, sir, anymore, I apologize, but that actually the technology is just not good enough. It's just not what I would call enterprise ready, but it has a big brand behind it that pushes and pushes and goes through the old buying channel. And so you see this video equipment in the room and these very expensive setups, and they're just not utilized. Yeah.
Just look at the adoption, of course, of the social networks. Like just in the UK, 70% of the people are using Facebook. 70%. You have 1.4 billion people using WhatsApp every month, sending around 64 billion messages a day. So that's spread. So when we see, actually, we have Royal Bank of Scotland, for instance, they are using Workplace. This is not a millennials company. Actually, it's a century company. But with a lot of people with a very diverse workforce, and all of them use Workplace. So I think, as you said, like it's much more about like the user experience, onboarding experience, the simplicity that will drive adoption, rather than actually like age. That's my guess.
What's the date on this? It says future. When are we talking?
2020.
Nice.
Good question. Thank you.
I was really interested in the comment about the devices that users are using, and they're not so worried about the flashy device anymore. There's just as long as they have the device they need. But looking into the future, where do you see like the physical devices going from the smartphones and the laptops that we have today?
That's a very good question. you know, I think the thing is devices will become distributed. So what people use to interact with systems and functions will become very different. So there's the world of personal device. You might have, depending on your environment, say ruggedized tablets, which are, you know, that you'll see more of that. Smart watches, of course, devices aimed at healthcare, for example, and that is a business-to-business environment. If you're in a hospital, for example, you're a hospital provider. But really, for me, it's about sensors over devices. I think maybe the discussion is moving on. So there was a figure there about IoT, and we've in fact written a report on IoT and its implications for collaboration in the workplace. And you're going to be able to, you're going to see more sensors trigger communication services, right? It could be that there's a crisis somewhere or a fire, and so things go out in the company to the board members and the crisis management team. A conference call is set up automatically. So I think instead of worrying about the device, the form factor is probably pretty set. You can go talk to the consumer about what's useful. That's probably going to happen in the enterprise. I've seen more uptake of, again, glasses, virtual reality and augmented reality glasses. But I'm thinking in terms of the capabilities and the sensors that will trigger communication events, and that will include much more than the device that you're used to interacting with your colleagues on.
To me, for the enterprise, I think we're going to see the rise of camera platform. If you think about the way we communicate in consumer, we move from text to photos to videos, and at some point in the future to virtual reality 360 videos. If you look at how we communicate at work, it's still very, very text heavy. When actually our brains are designed to consume visual stuff. Our brain actually process 15,000 times faster pictures than text. So I expect to see us using more and more camera in the workplace and AR through the mobile. And we see actually some companies leveraging workplace chat and the camera platform to scan code bar and all these things and to retrieve information so people can come back, and have actions.
I know there's a question here and another one there, but we're just over. So I want to just preserve the time for the other speakers. But I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention. Please, I'll be around in the break. So if you have questions you weren't able to ask, I think we both can maybe take them in the break.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.